Hey guys, and so we are live. There seems to be a little bit of a lag on this. I'm just trying a new webcam device today. So if there are any sort of technical issues with this at all, then please do. Right, hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. Any sort of technical. Okay. Cool. Okay, sorry about that. I'm just trialing this new piece of equipment today, this new webcam. So if there are some technical difficulties with this, then please do let me know in the chat, give me a shout or whatever. But hopefully this should work pretty well. I got this new camera. I think looking at it now, the picture looks pretty good. Maybe you can give me a thumbs up in the chat if you think it looks good. I'm going to try something else actually as well, because I'm using these headphones at the moment in order to use the microphone, which I think generally speaking for these live broadcasts is better. But having said that, this webcam device has speakers and a microphone attached. So that being the case, I'm going to unplug the mic and I'm going to try just to talk into the webcam for a little while. Do let me know if the sound isn't coming through well, or if it sounds better with the headphones plugged in. So I'm going to do that now. There we go. So I'm now talking just naturally into the microphone. I hope that you can still hear that. So do let me know if it sounds worse or if it's better than using those headphones that I was using before with the microphone attached. I need to get an external mic for this anyway. I've got a thumbs up there from somebody, so hopefully that means it's sounding good. I do have an external mic. I've got a really, really good mic. It's over in Berlin at the moment. I don't have it here in London. So I need to rectify that issue, because obviously to do this professionally, it's good to have a really high quality mic as well. So I'll either get a new one or get my mic back from Berlin, where it currently resides. Probably getting very cold, because I imagine it's pretty chilly over there. Now, today, we are doing a show about addiction. I've actually called the show The Truth About Addiction. And you have, you might be aware of, if you are a stalwart of these sort of red pill related broadcasts, if you like, because he is a moderator for Rollo Tomasi. He is a moderator for Rich Cooper. He is often in the chat on shows like somebody saying it was clearer before. So much better quality. Okay, all right. Your wishes might come on, guys. Hold on. Okay, hopefully that's better. All right, fine. So I need to get the external mic or just continue to use the headphones, which is fine. I mean, to be honest, when we do Rule Zero, we always tend to use headphones. All the guys use headphones, unless you look at the guys like Rich and Roller, who have invested. The mic you're using has poor sound quality. Okay, well, you know, as I say, I'll seek to address that. I think this is going to be the best that we get probably for this session. I'm just trying to think if I've got anything else around. I don't think I have. Anyway, let's move on from that. The topic of the Conk, who, as I say, you should be aware of, because he's appeared on a lot of people's shows, things like Rich Cooper, things like Rollo Tomasi. He's often in the chat for Rule Zero, and so on and so forth. The only issue with Mr. Conk is he did contact me just before the show, and I think he is trying probably to get in, but he hasn't. Hang on a sec, I'm just going to text him now. Highly professional. He hasn't come into into StreamYard yet. So while we wait for him to do that, I'll kick things off. And I wanted to talk a bit about addiction, because, to be honest, it is a really, really, how do I put this? It's something that's very close to my heart, because it's something that has affected me massively since I was a young guy. And I think that it's something that we need to talk about
in the manosphere, because it's not really talked about that much, or when it is talked about, it's not talked about with particularly very much intelligence, or it's not talked about really particularly very much with any sort of understanding of what addiction actually means. And if you want an example of that, then if you were on Twitter last week, or sorry, further into this week, really, then what you will have noticed is there are loads of guys talking about pornography, and they were talking about pornographic addiction, or addiction to pornography. And to my mind, and I am, as we'll go into my story in a minute, I'm somebody who has suffered from addiction, not to pornography, I hasten to add, but I have suffered from addiction. It seems that these guys are way off base in terms of the way that they're using the term addiction, the way that they're talking about it, how they understand addiction. And I think it's just really, really important for the community that we try to get our heads around this. Now, I don't want to go too far down the pornography rabbit hole today, because that is one subject that we can certainly talk about. It's been talked about on a number of people's shows this week. I know Rollo and Ryan did a show about porn. And I know that John from Modern Life Dating, I think, did a show about porn as well. So it's been well covered this week. And I don't really intend to talk specifically about porn today. I want to talk about the wider issue of addiction. Now, can you be addicted to porn? I think you can, in a sense, but I do think that sort of addiction, what we call addiction in that instance, is qualitatively different to addiction to a substance like an opiate, which is like heroin or OxyContin or something of that kind, morphine, or indeed alcohol, which is an incredibly addictive substance. And I think addiction to substances is a very different beast to what you might really call behavioral addictions to things like pornography. Okay. But I think anyway, before we get into the weeds of that kind of stuff, I need to talk to you a little bit about addiction as far as I'm concerned, as far as my experience is concerned. Hang on a sec. I'm just going to say, I'm just trying to get Conk into the studio now, so hopefully he's going to come in a minute. But I will. Yeah. So anyway, my experience, right? Okay. So look, people who followed my stuff for a number of years might know that I no longer drink and drugs, okay? And I haven't done for a very long time. So despite my beautiful and youthful looks, I'm actually getting on a bit. I'm actually in my 40s, and I haven't drunk alcohol or used drugs for over 17 years. So in fact, nearly coming up for 18 years, which is a bloody long time. It could even be, if there's anybody 18 watching this, it could even be as long as somebody watching this has been alive. So it's a bloody long time not to use drink and any narcotic substances. Have I had a good life? Yeah, I've had a bloody amazing life. It's been awesome. And I can tell you, you might have read about some of it in some of my world-class books. And if you haven't, I would recommend that you get Renegade Dating Blueprint, because there's lots of my story in that book. But how I did that, we'll explain in a minute. But I'm going to get into the sort of definitions of why that had to happen in my life, why I sort of made that decision to stop, what caused it, and how I have, survived and thrived in society ever since. Okay, now look, on that note, Mr. Conk has now arrived. So I'm going to bring him in, and I'll introduce him, and we'll talk a little bit about his experience. So here we go.
Hey, how's it going?
Conk, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, doing great.
It's good to see you, man. It's good to finally put a face to the name.
Oh, yeah, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was explaining to the viewers, obviously, we've been in contact for a little while, largely through Twitter, but through other people's YouTube channels, etc., etc. And I've obviously been very aware of you because you're very active in the community, very active in terms of discussion. But the reason that you're on the show today is because we were talking off air about this subject of addiction. And actually, you suggested to me the idea of doing this show because you have some experience. Other guys a little bit about that experience and where your where you come in on this.
Okay. Yeah. So as of right now, I'm actually on my lunch break. I'm a substance abuse social worker and counselor type thing. I'm basically
Cool,
a
man.
therapist without the license. I do all of their work and more, but
Cool, man.
it just changes the title and the pay essentially, but it's all the same job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I currently work at an outpatient for substance abuse specifically.
Nice. And whereabouts are you? You don't have to tell me exact.
Kansas City area, Kansas City, Missouri.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long have you been in that line of work for?
I've been in the line of work total since about 2014, 2015. This specific job is in May, but I've been in the social work, mental health, substance abuse field since 2014.
Okay, that's interesting. And you told me that you had trained to be a pastor before, or you did you actually practice as a pastor, or did you train and then just change over to the social work stuff?
Yeah, so it's a funny story. I actually I got my bachelor's in Western theology, Western religion. I studied Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, actually.
Nice.
And I worked in a lot of different denominations as, youth pastor, associate pastor, children's pastor, the backup guy usually for all of those, but I did a lot of the behind the scenes church work.
Yeah.
And then actually in 2014, I was hired at a Christian social work is where I started pushing it towards because I didn't like the church structure.
Okay.
And then and that's where I got the first taste of blending it. And then from there, I realized how screwed up, kind of the church government structure is in that as well. So I just went straight to, mainstream secular social work. And I've been way more fulfilled in that. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. No, that's really interesting because I think what we'll come on to talk about, well, hopefully one of the things I wanted to talk about is the sort of spiritual element to recovery, and maybe you've got some insights into that. Because recovery is really predicated on having some form of spiritual awakening. It's very hard to, and that sounds a bit woo-woo, and guys are going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? But it's very hard to recover from a hardcore addiction without some sort of spiritual awakening, without some sort of, I don't know, it's almost like you have to, it's almost like another form of the red pill, isn't it, in a way? You have to sort of see through the matrix of your addiction and see that there's another way of life beyond it.
Exactly. Yeah, I would say that for sure, because when you get stuck in those routines, and those habits, they get in so addiction's crazy, specifically when it comes to substances, is because you can think of traditional addictions, like smoking or, those kind of things that a lot of people think about. A lot of those are habit loop, but when you have substances involved, it's habit loops plus chemical dependency, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. So in the place where you're working, are the people that you're dealing with, are they still using, or have they stopped? Is it like they've stopped and they've got to stay stopped or they get thrown out, or is it like a wet house where they're still using, or what's the deal?
Yeah. So I have I would say my repertoire is 2/3 people in drug court, that are legally required to be there as part of their sentencing. And then the other 1/3 is actually voluntary. And those, are kind of hit and miss and that kind of stuff. Some are still using and want to quit. Some are, usually baby abstinent, maybe a couple months or so. And then the drug court guys that are mandatory there, they're actually the most, they are the best to work with, and they're most willing to work with, surprisingly, because, they got the real actual slap in the face, of reality, going through the criminal system and all of that. So they kind of get forced to get their eyes open, even if they didn't want to.
Yeah. So I don't feel comfortable sharing, but have you ever had issues in this area, or is this just something that you're professionally interested in?
I've definitely had negative habits, but not the chemical dependency type, such as alcohol or opioids or stimulants or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to talk a little bit about my own experience. I don't want to get this going on for too long, which it could do, because obviously I don't want to railroad the whole show. But just to give people a bit of context, I suppose. My relationship with alcohol was always an addictive relationship from the very first time that I took a drink. So it's sort of like I became in the end a daily drinker, where I was drinking every day. I would drink sort of before work. I drink at lunchtime. I drink, I'd be drinking basically the whole time, keeping the alcohol, topped up in my system the whole time in order to function. But I didn't start like that. I started off as, well, I had a couple of drinks when I was a teenager. Then it became sort of weekend drinking. Then the weekend slowly spread out until a weekend was like Monday to, Friday until Sunday. Then it was Friday till Monday, then Friday till Wednesday, and the weekend, until in the end, the weekend just became the whole week. And, I was drinking the whole time. On top of that, I was also using other substances. And while other substances, and no opiates, by the way, but other things, so the usual party drug type suspects, including cocaine, which of course is very addictive as well in its own right, and also amphetamines, which are very addictive as well. And although alcohol was my primary problem, really, in a sense, because alcohol was the thing that I always came back to. Alcohol was always the one that sort of like I couldn't do without in the end. The other stuff I developed some pretty addictive patterns with as well. Certainly from it would be sort of like I'd go out at the weekend, I'd do a load of this stuff, I'd have a good time, and then I'd come down and I feel like absolute dog crap for for Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday I start to feel a little bit better, and I'm a bit like, Sunday night, I'm like, I'll never do that again. I've got to stop this. This is no good for me. This is terrible. And then I'd go through a couple of days of sort of withdrawal, feeling absolutely terrible. And then Wednesday, I'd sort of be like, do you know what? I kind of fancy doing that again. And then and then Thursday, I'm like planning the weekends. And then Friday, I'm traveling to wherever I'm going to go. And then I'm back on it, And it's sort of like, how did that happen? Because I went from a period, like the weekend before, saying I'm never going to do this again, to doing exactly the same thing again and getting the same results,
Yeah. And that's to me. So addiction's interesting because you can't. Oh, I think you cut out a bit. You're frozen. Okay, there you go. All right. So the interesting about addiction is like, it's not something you can like objectively measure. You can't say that guy has 5 grams of addiction. You know what I mean? It is an internal process, right? That you can't observe, but you can see behaviors and you can see patterns of it, right? Yeah, and I think what you just said there is one of the biggest, red flag triggers that I know somebody is in addiction and either in denial or kind of helpless is like when you feel those after effects and those withdrawals and you want to quit, but then you still can't, under your own power. Like, and like that's super obvious with drugs, but that can happen to almost anything addicted, It's that disenchantment of I know I need to stop and I can't, even if I try, right?
Yeah, true. And by the way, it's worth pointing out that I've also had the same sort of. I mean, I have this kind of response to pretty much everything, right? So I used to have it to sugar when I was younger, and even quite recently, actually, I've had to really look at my sugar intake again. In the last year, because I was starting to use it in a way to make me feel better. I've had it with shopping and spending money. I've had it with relationships and sex to some extent, obviously. I've written a load of books about it. So all of these things I can use in an addictive sort of way. But as you say, the difference with, say, alcohol was that you also, on top of that, you have the chemical thing as well, don't you? So by the end of it, I was chemically hooked on alcohol. So I would get very, very bad withdrawals if I tried to stop. Rather than stopping, the only option would seem to be, well, I've got to carry on drinking. I've got to drink more. And I got to a weird mental space. And when you're in a space where you're pretty much intoxicated the whole time, that does weird things to your brain, as people will imagine. And so my sense of myself, and I was also taking prescribed sleeping pills at the time, my sense of myself was kind of all over the place, right? And I got into this weird headspace in my head where I'm thinking, I can't give this up. I was thinking, I can't give alcohol up even if I wanted to, because I'll probably like have a seizure and die or something, or I'll probably, I just can't, which of course can be true for some people in, DTs. But but it was sort of even more than that. It was like I just cannot exist without this liquid, without doing this to myself. You know, I really had to like hit a rock bottom before, or several rock bottoms actually, before you know it got to a point where I was able to sort of do anything about it. Does that sort of chime with the experience of the people that you've come into contact with?
Yeah. Actually, it's a pretty crazy process, and a lot of it has to do with what I teach, at least, is about narratives, where you're creating narratives on yourself that may or may not be true. You know, our brains are not built for the truth; they're built for survival. You know, first and foremost.
Right.
And a lot of people can catastrophize their thought patterns and all of these things when it might not necessarily be true. Like you said, it is possible. Like I've actually had a client die within the last couple months from an overdose. So, you know, it comes from those, and it's like, it's a pretty serious profession, and you can, depending on the substance, you can die from withdrawals, or you can die from overdose after a relapse, prolonged abstinence, you know, because your tolerance. But but the concept of narratives, in that there's objective facts, observable things, you can see this, this, and this, and then we like to try to fill in the blanks with our own storyline that can almost, you know, catastrophize it significantly more. And I think one of the biggest solutions to that is, like, it has a bunch of hot button terms, you know, of like mindfulness or meditation or prayer or all of those things, but like the root of all of those is just like awareness and being able to step back, you know, of what's actually going on, and be able to observe what am I genuinely feeling versus what am I making up in my head? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that really resonates with me, because I think there's a lot of fantasy that goes into that goes on in the addict's head. Not least, by the way, of denial, because it was because I drank up until about age 26, 27 or so. And I wasn't really walking around going, oh my God, I've got this addiction problem. I've got to go, you know, I've got to seek help and blah, blah, blah. I was walking around thinking, well, my life's pretty crap. And if your life was like mine, then you would probably drink like this too. I would say, I want to sort my life out, but I can't stop drinking because drinking is the only thing that's holding me together. So, and my brain was really like wired in a way that I just couldn't see that it was actually the drink that was causing my problems, or a lot of my problems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the most common examples we used, especially like when we're talking to new people about narratives and things like that, is like one of the best things is to separate it is the example of like using smaller everyday things, right? That almost everybody can relate to. Like if you have a bad habit of like drinking a lot of soda or eating a lot on a road trip, like I'm trying to make it super basic, obvious things like, oh, I got to drive 6 hours on this road trip. There's no way I'm going to make it that 6 hours without chips and without, you know, a Monster energy drink and without a cigarette. You know what I mean? And you got to stop and think about, okay, like we know objectively, you'll probably feel sensations from not doing those, but it's not going to say, but the act of you saying, I can never do it without these, that's the narrative you're creating, right? Is like when you go, there might be different changes in your thought patterns and your feelings, and like your body might feel different, like if you do have a craving come up, but the narrative of, oh, I can't handle it, that's what you're creating and implementing on yourself, right? That's not necessarily true. That's completely made up in your brain. You've created a good guy and a bad line and a plot line out of some observable facts, right?
That's really interesting. And I mean, and this applies in so many different areas, doesn't it? Because I don't know whether you ever deal with things like codependency and stuff like that, but this can come into play in relationships as well. And even when we think about you know, something like one-itis, I mean, what is one-itis really? But it's sort of addiction to a person, isn't it? It's that thought that I can't live without this person, and if she leaves me, then I won't be able to survive. I'm gonna have to kill myself.
Yeah, exactly. One-itis is the biggest narrative of all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and exactly, and it's a story that, like you say, we tell ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't live without this woman. This is my one and only. Like, I don't know what to do with myself, and that's why you see so many guys, you know, that are super depressed at the bottom of the barrel and getting zeroed out over these specific women, because they're holding onto that narrative so long, despite contradictory evidence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Would you say, because I've seen this argued and I would somewhat subscribe to it myself, that the world has become much more addictive in recent times, or there's something about the nature of modern existence that makes us much more prone to addiction than maybe we previously were?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the learning system of a human brain, and you can, like, if you're looking at evolutionary biology, you can find this pattern of trigger craving behavior, rinse and repeat, depending on it's good or bad. You can find that cycle of learning all the way back to like sea slugs, which is literally just like a cluster of cells. You know what I mean? They don't even have a definitive brain. But going that far down the evolutionary plot line, you can find those same rudimentary learning behaviors. And so this is hardwired into us, long term. We're not going to evolve out of it in 100 years. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, the problem is, like, modern society today is so much trying to hyper that loop, do it faster and faster and faster and faster, right? You click on something, you get an immediate reward. You go, instead of having to sit and go to the grocery store and prepare food and cook it, you get all of that in the matter of 90 seconds in a drive-through. You know what I mean? And that becomes your new normal. And it goes in a lot in with the saying of what you practice grows stronger. And so even though we still have the same evolutionary rudimentary concepts of learning and thinking and going through things, we're able to do it at such an accelerated rate that like our new normal and our new comfortable just exponentially speeding, so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for myself, I would say it's this feeling of I've got to do this. I've got to do this thing to feel okay, to feel okay in myself. And it used to be, for a long time, it used to be alcohol. And it was like, I need to have a drink in order to, it's on a deeper level even than being able to socialize with people. It's sort of like, I've got to have a drink in order to deal with the reality of being myself. Do you know what I mean? I've got to have this drink because that allows me to sort of exist in the world without pain. And I think a lot of this, what it comes down to is it's which try to escape pain. And that could be through using porn, or it can be through shopping, or any of these things, really.
Yeah. And I definitely relate to that. In how we usually bring about it in my classes is talking about just like there's credit card debt, there's emotional debt, right?
Right.
You're not removing the problem with your substance. You're putting it off, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if I have a credit card with $1,000 limit and I buy $1,000 TV, it wasn't a free TV. I'm betting against my future self. I'm borrowing my future's money, right?
Yeah.
And likewise, every time we take substances to try to get away from something, it's just like using a credit card. Eventually, the bill's going to get due, and it's all going to come crashing back.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Yeah.
So your option is either deal with it and start working through it, or keep opening up more credit cards and putting yourself farther in debt, which is the easier solution, right?
Yeah, which is another thing you can get addicted to as well, obviously. Do you find do you get people coming to you and you see their addiction shift from one thing to another?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of times, I'm really against the, when you try to stop something, a lot of times we just stop, right? But that's not how our brain and body works. We always want to replace it with something. So even though you're inadvertently not trying to, like, if your whole life is just, okay, I'm going to stop doing this, like using something super simple, like I'm just going to, stop eating bread, if you're doing low carb, I'm just going to stop eating bread. But if all you think about is, I'm going to stop eating bread, your whole life is going to be eventually re-vacuumed back into eating bread and thinking about bread, right? So you got to have this kind of replacement. But the problem is you got to check what kind of replacement you're trying to get through, right? And so a lot of people will say, the justification replacement is usually like, oh, it's not as bad as what I was using, even though it's bad. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people just kind of find one addiction to another. And like a lot of our classes are based on finding healthy alternatives, right? Because there's a phrase, nature abhors a vacuum. And it's the same thing with our mind and our body. Like if you eventually try to stop all negative things, you're eventually just going to find yourself sitting in your room on the floor alone. And that's not how humans work. That's not how nature works. It's always trying to find and strive something else. So you got to find ways to direct yourself in a healthy manner. Yeah. Just saying, I'm going to stop, I'm going to stop, I'm going to stop. That's all you're going to really be thinking about is what you're trying to stop from, because there's nothing there to fill the gap. Right.
Well, yeah. Well, my experience was when I first started to try to stop drinking alcohol, I was living in Manchester in the north of England at the time. And I remember one weekend thinking, right, clearly this is not good. I'm gonna not drink anything for this entire weekend. And I can't tell you how difficult it was to have that whole expanse of 48 hours ahead of me with nothing to fill it. Or that's how it seemed to me at the time. I mean, it sounds a bit pathetic to say that now, but at the time, because my whole life and existence was bound up with being drunk the whole time. It was sort of this, so I remember on the one of the days, the Saturday, I ended up going to the movies like 3 times in a row and watching 3 different movies, because I was literally I was climbing the walls. It was like, what the hell can I do to replace this thing? And that's a real problem for people, I think. But then the danger is then you go into something else, like you say, and that could potentially be even more harmful.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes a lot into what I talk about is a lot of people understand like the basic of triggers of like, if I do this thing, it could trigger me to do something else,
Yeah.
And like the most common ones are like hanging out with your old friends that you used to use with, or, obviously going to the liquor store if your issue is, liquor, obviously, like going to the liquor store, going through liquor aisles, that's clearly going to be triggering, or smelling something with alcohol. But there are some triggers that are just as potent, but are really hard to, like you don't think about them at first, such as boredom, which kind of sounds like what it was in yours, right? Like you had that issue I was just talking about, is you had an absence of something and you wanted to fill it immediately. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when you have just an absence, whatever comes first just comes, you know what I mean? Instead of, and like we try to teach, plan out exactly what you're going to use in each situation. When I feel this way, I'm going to do one of these 3 things, right? And like and it's almost things you do like when you're in inpatient rehab, where they structure your whole life. But outpatients, it's so much harder because you have to do it yourself. You know what I mean? Right. Which is way harder. You know what I mean? Especially when you're in the very early recovery steps.
Yeah, I mean, so what happened for me? So I'll give a bit of a plug for 12-step recovery now, because and we talked about this off air, because basically, right, what happened for me was it became clear that there were problems in my life, and it was alcohol was sort of at the center of it. So I tried these different things. So I tried cold turkey, going to the movie 3 times a day. I tried things like I went to see my doctor, general practitioner, we say in the UK. I tried things like they got me to do a drinking diary where I was supposed to write down, how much I was drinking and try to then moderate. All of these different strategies. I think I tried hypnosis, different things, and none of the things actually worked for any length of time. And the only thing that has worked for a lasting amount of time, and this is my experience, because as I said, I mean, I haven't drunk for 17 years now. I haven't picked up a drug for that period of time as well. The only thing that worked for me was going into 12-step recovery meetings. And so I'll do a bit of a plug for that, just because myself, in my experience, that's what worked for me. Now, I know it's not necessarily for everyone. It's not the only way to give up, but the thing it gave me was a different framework to look at life through, right? Because before, I just I had no other way of dealing with life, because I'm not, and this is another thing actually, we're coming back to the religion. I mean, I'm not a religious person. I'm certainly not I'm certainly not, I'm probably agnostic is the best way to describe it. I certainly wasn't part of an organized religion. I certainly wasn't going to church or anything like that. So there was, and this is one of the problems of modernity, isn't it? I had literally no other framework except for this thing of using these substances the whole time, and going into 12-step recovery gave me a different framework. And like I say, that has allowed me. I mean, I had some slips at the beginning, but that's allowed me to stay stopped for a really long time. And I've got friends who've stayed stopped, remained sober for many years. People have remained sober for 50 years and so on and so forth. Having said that, there are some pretty not terribly great stats about 12-step recovery as well that would suggest that statistically maybe it doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think the statistic is. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't. As I say, it's worked for me. It's worked for a lot of people that I know. But rather than getting into the weeds of is 12 steps a good thing or a bad thing, it's more like the overwhelming point for me was it was putting something else in place. It was putting another framework in place.
Exactly. Yeah.
To live life by.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying before. When you're just trying to stop and you have that abscess, you have that vacuum of yourself. You know what I mean? You need the alternatives. You know what I mean? And to me, that all comes back to that self empowerment. So when I talk about power, like, people say money is power, knowledge is power. To me, the root of all power is options, right? And so, when you're in that addictive lifestyle, you've kind of pigeonholed yourself into one option. Like, this is my life now. I don't know if I can get rid of it. And when you try to stop on your own, now you're at nothing. Now you're at zero options, right? You don't know any better. But once you're able to plug into a whole new community and see that whole new way of life, just like the red pill we have here, right? It's not just, learning the new thing, but also having that community engagement and other people to empathize with your struggle, and you were able to see people on all their different walks of life and all their different steps in this new way to live. That gives you something to replace it with. You're no longer on the addiction path, and you're no longer on no path, just sitting in your own vacuum,
Yeah, totally. And I mean, one of the things about 12, so I seem to have got a bit blurry actually on the screen. I don't know what's wrong with this camera, but one of the things about the 12-step organizations is that there is community, and that, like you say, that's incredibly important. And yeah, it's mirrored in the red pill as well, because as much as we all like to dunk on the president of the manosphere, who will remain nameless, the one thing that I think he's right about is that community, is that guys meeting and coming together is an incredibly powerful thing. Whether that particular organization has done it as effectively as it could be done or not is another matter. But yeah, there is something incredibly, like you say, particularly when you're trying to make a big change in life, having other people there to support you, it's just so important.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the things I always proselytize every time I go is like, yeah, it's cool to be in all of these red pill membership groups and cool in being the red pill chat and being a part of the community, but never do that at sacrifice of actual IRL bros. You know what I mean? The importance of having those face-to-face real life relationships should always be above everything else. You know what I mean? This bond and the stuff we have is cool, but like, you can only get so much from the other side of a screen.
Yeah, totally. Unless you're, I guess, unless you're meeting up with people regularly, and obviously you've got people like Hunter Drew, who's got his fraternity of excellence. You've got Jack Murphy's got his thing now, hasn't he? People are starting to, obviously, John Modern Life Dating has got his hot dude meetups. So guys are recognizing the importance of this, and communities are sort of being built. And yeah, man, I think it's really, really important because, like you say, I mean, like you say, there's only, unfortunately, so much you can get through a screen, and you can get a lot through a screen, but you can't get everything through a screen. And when I go into a 12-step meeting, there's just an incredible power of all the people in the room, and this is actually, guys recently, on Twitter going on about like energy, man, and vibes and things like that, and as much as I'm a skeptic about that kind of, or the way that kind of thing's presented, let's say, the fact is that energy is a thing, and you've got a group of, you go into a room full of people who have the same goal or aspiration, and that is massively powerful. That's why I believe places of worship are really powerful, because you've got the same kind of thing going on there, haven't you?
Yeah, it's the concept of sanctuary. Most of the time when you hear the word sanctuary, you think of a church. But the term actually comes from the difference between sacred and profane. Sacred is like a special place. It doesn't have to be a church. It doesn't have to be a place where you pray. It can be wherever you set aside, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a physical space that's made for an intended thing, and it kind of gives it its own sense of presence, right? And then profane is something, on the other side of that, the more common public area. And so those are the actual original root words of sacred and profane. And we just kind of, our culture just assumed every time you hear the word sanctuary, oh, it's a church. You know what I mean? But anything can be a sanctuary. Anything can be sanctified in your own life and in your own terms, right?
Exactly.
And to me, I would say support groups are sanctified, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. Which is the whole value of things like John's hot dude meetups and so on. Yeah, man. I mean, here's the thing. Here's the other thing, right? To talk about spirituality for a minute. Now, I did a show yesterday with Corey, or the day before with Corey, talking about religion, and we talked about Christianity, and we're kind of like, exploring the idea that Christianity is a bit cucked, or it encourages.
Yeah, I heard it. I liked it.
It's like a slightly controversial sort of idea, but it's you saw where we were coming from. But nevertheless, the spirituality, right, is incredibly important. And in terms of, so what 12-step recovery argues is that the only effective way that the addict can recover is by having some kind of spiritual experience. And this actually was something that Carl Jung said. So Carl Jung dealt with an alcoholic patient. The patient went to him. I think Jung spent about a year with this guy trying to help him, working through therapy with him to try to get him to break the pattern of alcoholism. And Jung wrote back to, I think it was Bill Wilson, actually, one of the founders of 12-Step Recovery, and said to him, the only way that this guy is going to have a proper long-lasting recovery from addiction is to have some sort of spiritual experience. And so in the 12-step model, what you do is you go in and you attend these meetings and you talk to people and stuff, but you work a program which is designed to help you to clean up some of the wreckage of the past and then have a spiritual experience, so that then you're able to then go on and live your life in a different way. Is that something? How do you feel about that? Does that sort of jive with your sort of sense of recovery?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of not just recovery, but really most of life is like, have you ever heard the mindfulness paradox? It's the usually the more you try to do something, the less it's actually going to happen. In that, it's I could talk about this for a while. This is like one of my entire classes that I talk about for like 8 hours a month. But to try to boil it down, it's thinking about like the most common example is like if you're shooting free throws or you're playing basketball, the more you think and try about dribbling and shooting free throws, probably the worse you're going to play the game, right? There's that sense of being able to step back and have that flow state is what they call it a lot of times, as opposed to the opposite of the slang term I believe is called the yips, where you're so overthinking and overcritical and trying to overanalyze everything that like you're actually going to get worse at it, right?
Right. But it's almost like you're improving your fault sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So like the more you try and you're putting your try hard pants on, usually the worse you're probably going to do. And so, but when you achieve that flow state or whatever, and a lot of that comes into what I call it surrendering into the process, right? You're no longer trying to strive and you're going to do it yourself. And I'm going to try harder and I'm going to check all the boxes of just me and the problem. Like as soon as you're able to like surrender to the problem, surrender to the process, and your ego is no longer invested in it, right? You're now able to look to something else that's not just you right here, right now, striving, right? And to me, that's a spiritual experience, right? That's not a brain neural. That's not like brain neurons firing. It's more of the consciousness, right? It's not your brain telling you; it's your mind, which I think are two different things, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's to do with, and again, this is something that I was encouraged to do in my recovery, which is to sort of to puncture the ego, to get rid of the ego, to realize that you're not the center of the universe, and that helps you to put the problem into context, and to surrender to the problem, like you said. And that's the classic thing. I mean, everyone's heard that, haven't they? The first thing that you have to do is admit you've got a problem. Well, you do have to do that, but then you have to almost say, look, on my own, I'm powerless over this, but I believe that this process, or that this group of people, or that this whatever it is, can help me to get through it. And that is also, as I say, part of like tamping down the ego, and that then sets you free. which is kind of a weird thing to say. And I'm very conscious while we're talking about this stuff. There are probably guys who are going to watch this who are going to be like, "My God, this is like Troy's gone Pat Stedman. This is like, what is this woo-woo bullshit?"
Yeah.
You know, you're going to be getting the crystals out, and I'm aware of the irony because I'm very much aware of the irony. All I can say is that in the way that I've experienced this stuff in terms of 12 steps, it's incredibly pragmatic, and it's helped me, and it's helped many other people that I know and that I've met. So my problem with the sort of the woo-woo stuff that dudes talk about is not so much the woo-woo-ness in itself. It's more like, okay, you're talking about energy, you're talking about vibes. Well, how do you put that into a system? How do you make that work for guys? How does that help a guy who wants to get better with dating?
Yeah, how I see
put it in
how
system and it works.
Yeah, how I see that woo-woo, you know, that energy kind of stuff is like we were talking before. There's narratives. They're kind of just saying, "Oh, screw that narrative. Try my narrative." You know what I mean? But really, I think the solution is starting with being able to identify narratives and try to step away and see the objective facts of what's going on. Right?
Yeah.
That's like the real first step. Is like, okay, I'm doing this, you know, and like before I was talking about striving, like that in itself is a narrative. I can do it on my own. I can do this, you know, I can work it out. It's not that big of a problem. I'm just going to try. But then the more often you try, usually the more often you fail, especially when it comes to things like so severe as addiction. Right. And so to me, a lot of it is that surrendering to the process is removing the narratives and seeing what's actually going on. Right. And like, that's why I'm with you in that I really don't like the crystal energy woo-woo guys, because they're like, yeah, that old narrative's bad. That blue pill narrative's bad. That other narrative's bad. But try our narrative. Our narrative works. Where it's like unprofound, you know, claims to having the answers. Right.
The issue that I've got with those guys is that it's all very vague. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, yeah, man, energy, it's a thing. There's energy, you know, but they don't really go much further than that. And my question is, okay, well, fine, it is a thing, but how does that help the guy in Alabama who's a neckbeard and can't get any matches on Tinder? How's that going to help him to get a date? How's that going to help him get laid on the weekend, right? If you can put it into a system and you can show that it works, then okay, you know, let's see it. But I don't see these guys doing it. But the difference I would say with something like 12 Step is that it is a system, it is a program, and I have seen it work. So, you know, I say, there's nothing wrong with accepting that there are things beyond our understanding. It's just, well, okay, but how do we make it work for us, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But I would see, so I think we're agreeing. I think we're just using different terms. Because like that last sentence you said, like, we got to be able to accept, you know, our lack of understanding. It's kind of that humility of knowing that there's way more knowledge in the universe than I could ever fully comprehend. Yeah. You know, and that's usually why I don't like the narrative part, because the narrative is saying I have the answers. Right. But I think the solution is really understanding and saying, I don't have all the answers. One of the mottos for my group is reality is messy and that's okay. Right. And it's that surrendering to the process and realizing there's a lot of objective things happening, but there's also a lot of me that's subjectively trying to connect dots that aren't necessarily connected.
Yeah, exactly. But how do you feel about acceptance? Because acceptance is a big thing as well, right? And this applies to Red Pill as well, because it's sort of like, okay, the problem guys have with Red Pill is they say, yeah, it's dark, it's negative, it's all of it nihilistic, all of these things, and it's like, well, some things about human nature are not terribly attractive, you know. What are you going to do about it? You know, do you want to pretend that's not the case? Do you want to ignore it? Do you want to just hope it goes away, or do you just want to accept it and say, okay, I understand that things can be a bit shitty sometimes, that's fine, I'm just going to do the best that I can do to have a good life off the back of it.
Yeah, acceptance is huge. I definitely agree with you on that. And I think that's like the reality is messy and that's okay is a very well linked with what you're talking about, is like, you know, being able to surrender and like understand that you're not going to understand everything. Right.
Yeah.
Both of those are a sense of accepting your humanity. Right. Like there's almost a near infinite amount of knowledge in the world. And, you know, a brain capacity can only hold so much. Like if you're thinking about like, oh, how big is the internet? Like petabytes of data, you know what I mean? And maybe our brain can hold like 5 gigabytes of it, maybe. And you just got to accept that I'm never going to understand fully everything, but I'm willing to, you know, trust the process, explore options, you know, gather those things, even though I'm okay with myself of not having that ego of I know it all, right?
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say to the guy, right, who's watching this, and maybe he's addicted to weed, or let's not use the word addicted. Maybe the guy he's smoking weed the whole time. He kind of knows that he's doing it too much, but he can't stop. I'm going into stereotypes now, but he's playing video games the whole time. He's sort of like, I'm not achieving the things that I want to achieve in my life. I'm doing this because it makes me feel good. And I kind of sense that perhaps I'm doing it too much, but I can't slow down. I can't stop. And that equally, that be drugs or alcohol, as you know, other porn or sex or whatever. What would you say to that guy? I mean, what should he do to try to start to sort things out?
I would say, first of all, yeah, if he's trying to stop and he can't, like he's like, all right, I'm stopping Tuesday, and then Tuesday rolls around and he gets those triggers, he gets those cravings, and he's using again, even though he was planning with his own discipline and his own trying that he was going to stop, and then he ended up not stopping, right? I would say, like, I've never heard of a 12-step group or a addiction recovery group charge people. It's free, right? The worst thing is you go in, you think it's not for you, and you leave, right? You know, there's no door free. There's no door fee. And most addiction recovery groups, they don't force you to talk your first couple of weeks, right? Yeah, you're allowed to go in and sit in and listen, right? Yeah, it's the most low pressure environment of all time.
Yeah, if at all. I mean, the ones, I don't know how it is. I mean, the ones I go to in London, I mean, nobody's forced to talk at all. You could go for years and not say anything, and no one would say anything, you know?
Exactly, yeah. And so, like step one would be, you know, Google search around, see what programs are offered in your area. You know, now that 12-step, you know, has gotten so big, you know, I think it started in the 70s or 80s, right? I don't remember exactly.
It's earlier than that, actually. It's like the 30s, I think.
Where it was specifically for alcohol. Yeah, I was thinking of like the modern interpretation where it's almost open to everything. You know, they have eating addiction, they have smoke, they have ones for smoking, they have Narcotics Anonymous, they have, you know, and so like gambling. It's grown to such a step. Like you could even probably find, if you live in a big enough city, you could probably find a weed anonymous in your area. You know what I mean?
Probably. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of 12-step programs for a lot of things, and like worst case scenario is look up a 12-step program, go visit one of the free lessons and just see how it goes. See if you can relate to anyone there. See if their message is, you know, is something you're willing to try, and, you know, go for it, you know?
Yeah.
There's no price of entry. There's no membership fee. There's no nothing like that. There's no putting on the spot. Do you have to public speak your life right there? You know what I mean? It's a pretty low pressure situation. Google around, go start visiting and see if something clicks, right? That's always step one.
Yeah. Or they find something like what you offer, because you are not, you don't offer you're not a 12-step guy as such, are you? You offer something that's like sort of akin.
Yeah. I work for an intensive outpatient. Yeah. Where it is, it does cost you money unless you got Medicaid, but then you still bill Medicaid, right? Kind of thing. And so it's the step right before rehab, right?
Okay.
It's like right. So we'll usually have people until they get into rehab, or we'll have people fresh out of rehab, or people that are involved in the drug court system, you know, that are in the legal system and have probation officers and all those kind of things. So it's one up from that. And my job consists of half meeting people one at a time, and then half actually teaching support groups.
Like
12-step. But
let's touch on the porn thing for a minute, because obviously that's been sort of big. that's obviously been a big discussion point in the last week or so. I mean, my thing about that, and I don't know, I'm interested to know what you think. My thing about that is, instinctively, I suspect that the number of guys out there who are properly, if that's the right word to use, who are seriously addicted to porn is pretty bloody low. And I think a lot of these dudes are making this case. They're saying, oh, porn is this addictive thing. It rewires your brain and blah, blah, blah. And while I'm not denying that, I suspect that the incidence of actual addiction is quite low. And I think these dudes are talking it up because they want to make a moral point, you know, because they're trad cons and they want to shame people about using porn. Would you agree with that? I mean, clearly there is an addictive element to porn for sure, but how dangerous really is it?
I would say there's pros and cons to everything, right?
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to a cheeseburger. There's pros and cons to nicotine. There's technically pros and cons to opioids. I mean, we still prescribe them, right? You know, there's pros and cons to everything, and I'm sure there's pros and cons to porn. You just got to list them out. Like I was saying before, remove the narratives. It's good. It's bad. It's nice. It's evil. All those things. Just look at it. Find your research. Find your data of that. And like from my experience and my research on it is, the negatives of it at least are that if you're constantly ejaculating, you're definitely lowering your drive overall, right? That immediate tranquility or that immediate kind of slothiness after ejaculating. People usually don't watch porn and then go run a 5K. You know what I mean? They usually kind of spurs into those kind of lazier, slower habits is what I've seen. Is they're kind of partnered together. But and if that's a chronic issue, then check that out. But I mean, at the end of the day, my state is self-abstinence is cool, but compelled abstinence is never cool, right? I will never want to make rules and you shoulds and should nots for any other person because I'm not living their life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always come at it from a sort of libertarian viewpoint in the sense that I kind of think people can do what they want to do, and as long as it's not harming anybody else, then that's their business, really. I mean, on the porn issue, I don't really have much insight into it, except to say that I could see how it could become an addictive cycle in terms of using it, because I think a lot of, as we've said, a lot of different things can become an addictive cycle. I think if you are, I think quite clearly, if you are fapping morning, noon, and night, and you've got huge databases of this stuff, and it's stopping you from doing other things that you should be doing, it's stopping you from having a fulfilled life, then you need to look at it for 100%. But I would say the same thing if it was video games. I'd say the same thing if it was weed. I'd say the same thing if it was I don't know, reading Victorian novels. Do you know what I mean? Like anything that you've got a compulsive relationship with and it's making your life crap, you need to look at it. But it does strike me with porn in particular that guys, that all of the outrage that we've seen in the last week is they want to hang it on the hook of addiction. They want to say this is somehow sort of uniquely addictive, but I don't think it is. I think it's just that they don't like it because they think it's morally bad. It doesn't fit in with the narrative that they want to present, which is of a Christian traditionalist sort of narrative. And so it pisses them off, But is it more addictive than video games? I don't know. I haven't seen the data. I suspect it's different strokes for different folks. No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It's obviously clearly not as fully chemically dependent as stuff like heroin or meth or alcohol, right?
Yes.
But it still hits the dopamine center, and it still goes through those habitual cycles of trigger craving behavior, right?
Of course.
So like video games and porn both still can be in that. And one of our catchphrases, of course, 12-step and all of these are always full of catchphrases, is like what you practice grows stronger, right? So the more frequent you're playing video games and the more frequent you're using pornography, that's now in your head, that neural pathway has just become a super highway. The more you built that up, just like doing bicep curls gives you huge biceps, right?
Yeah, true. I mean, I just get a bit pissed off when people are overly moralistic and try to control other people. That's kind of what gets me. It's not. I'm not going to argue that porn is some amazing thing, because clearly it bloody isn't, but it does piss me off when you've got some self-righteous dude on on Twitter who's sort of like lecturing other people about it or shaming other people about it, because it's none of your bloody business. It's not, and it's not going to create the downfall of Western civilization, whatever you think. And even if it is, you're not going to be able to do anything about it anyway. So just let people be, let people do what they want to do. But if it's becoming a problem for you, then sure, you need to seek some help. And again, there are 12-step groups for obviously, for sex. There's a Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous thing. There may even be sort of porn groups as well. You need to do your research if you think it's got that far. But obviously, in the interim, I think it's important to see that you've got a problem, accept it, and say, right, okay, I'm going to try to change this up, because it's got to be a decision that you make, right? Nobody else can do it for you.
Exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree with all of that. Like, yeah, once you're, the phrase I always use is like never should on yourself and never should on others. It's like its own play on words, but like as soon as you start using the word should, like you're now trying to enforce, right? You now essentially became an authoritarian saying my way is better than your way and everyone should do it this way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of these guys would agree with that. They'd say, well, my way is better. They shouldn't be using it. They should be doing this. But I'm just naturally resistant to that kind of authoritarian thinking and behavior. I just don't
just those blanket statements in general never work. Like if we used a blanket statement of everybody that's ever had clinical depression, should take exactly 50 milligrams of Abilify, like, there would be some pretty damn chaos. You can't blanket statement, even if it's the same issue, right? To me, it's always come down to like a decentralized, individualistic approach per person. And even if they're asking for help or not, that's the worst part is like if they're not even asking for help and you're still shooting all over them,
Yeah, totally. I just think it's another way to shame guys really, and to sort of try to imprint your, just to sort of virtue signal as well, kind of thing, really, which is never something I like to see. Do you know what I mean? I just don't think it's really. It just pisses me off that people are sort of high and mighty like that, and But anyway, look, we need to. Unfortunately, we need to sort of call it to an end because we've been on for an hour now, and I've got to get going in a bit. But it's been awesome to chat about this. I'd love to maybe do a follow up to this at some point because I think it's a really. It's a really important issue, obviously, to me personally, but I think it's something that needs to get talked about in a sort of serious way in this space because I think there's a bit of misinformation out there. Exactly, so I think it's really good that we've sort of got together and done this. Yeah,
for sure. I definitely enjoyed it. I mean, we could do a deeper dive into that spirituality aspect and that separation aspect because I think that's like one of the huge critical factors. And it's so hard to explain, in a couple minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It's hard to explain it without some kind of experiential or more in-depth dive, right?
Yeah, sure, for sure, man. Well, we'll look at getting something else in the diary to sort of get into this stuff in a deeper way. But in the meantime, is there anything that you would like to promote? I know that you're doing some YouTube stuff. Is there anything that you want to tell people about, where they can find you, etc.?
Yeah, you could just look up Conk in YouTube. I'm pretty sure I don't have a fancy specific URL for YouTube. I've only got my introductory video of how I explain things into milk or meat concepts. Milk is more prescriptive and for babies. Meat is more of like harder to think, grasp topics, where you kind of have to chew on them for a while after you've had your fill of meat and you're not a baby anymore, or have your fill of milk. And so that's kind of like my thing. And then I'm actually going to be talking about biblical sexuality, and it's definitely not what you think. I'm going to go through the scripture with the concordance of original Hebrew and Greek and show you that actually the Bible doesn't give a shit that much about your sex life. It has some very weird, very specific generalized rules like bestiality and incest. Like, don't do those, and almost everything else is fair game. And so I'm trying to unplug church dogma from like, what does the Bible literally say word by word in Hebrew and Greek? And you'll start seeing how much things are misconnected and misskewed and all of that. So I'm going to have a couple series on that. And that's actually going to end with an interview with Abu American.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. He's a great guy. And so we're going to talk about like, what does the Bible's idea of family and the Islam's idea of family? And we're going to compare and contrast because like, that's what the root word of patriarchy even came from, was the dad figure, right? And how the actual family is supposed to look like, both the Old Testament and Islam, talks a lot about polygamy and that, one man, multiple wives kind of thing. And so it'll be a fun deep dive into that and like, family structures, social structures, all of that kind of stuff. So it'll be fun.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like really good stuff. If you drop me the link, I'll put it in the description for this, so the guys can know where to find you, and obviously on Twitter as well. What's your Twitter handle? It begins with something else.
It is at Vanguard_Conk.
Yeah, Vanguard underscore Conk. Yeah.
Yeah, occasionally
yeah,
up with content there. Most of the time it's memes and shit posting, but you know, if you want to follow, go for it.
That's all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And as for myself, obviously, please do hit subscribe to this channel, hit the notifications bell so that you can see when I put new videos up. I'm really sort of concentrating on this channel at the moment, getting loads of content out on here. It's going great, but I would love your subscription because it just helps me, you know, to get up the algorithms, to spread the word, etc., etc. Do get on my email list as well. The link is under the video. And finally, my collection of 10 books, Renegade Dating Blueprint, which is all about dating, sex, the sexual marketplace, how to get laid, all of that amazing stuff. It's only $39 at the moment. The full value of that is $250. So it's a great deal. It's a digital download, instant access to all of those books. Again, it's in the link below. So I encourage you to grab hold of that while you can. And yeah, it's been an awesome show, Conk. Many thanks for coming along and for talking about this with me. It's been really, really great. As I say, we'll catch up again soon, and we'll try to get something else in the diary. But in the meantime,
yep.
Bye for now. Thanks.
All right. Have a good one.